I don't know what heels you're wearing, so it's absolutely fine if you just want to make yourself comfortable and crawl up to the front and we can all have a discussion. Like Lara said, I'm going to do a presentation based on a paper that I presented at a conference earlier this year in Paris, and I actually went to Paris to talk to the French about luxury. You could call me mad. What would I be able to teach the French about luxury? And it was really interesting while I was there that, of course, the French are all about, well, they own luxury as far as they're concerned, and they're all about getting bigger, brighter, better. And I was actually about getting more connected, smaller. So I'm going to share this with you, and I think I actually made some inroads with the French a little bit, or either next time I go there, I might find that when I go through customs, they won't let me into the country. Over time, and by the way, we have to compete with the music here, so just bear with it, it's a little bit distracting. Over time, luxury has been considered as a domain where premium and specialised product is available to an elite customer. It's the indulgence of the wealthy. It always created a distinguishing divide between the purveyors of fashion and then pretty much the rest of us, those who wore clothes. It was often perceived as the whimsy of the rich, and luxury was about being unique, specialised, elite and premium. Now, it's a really interesting social construct when you think that the notion of a particular tier of the industry in a way used to own fashion, and they provided accessibility to fashion. But status and social positioning has been pivotal to fashion probably for the last 150 years, and that's where it's sat. But I actually think that things are changing, and they have been changing now for the last decade. As we ease into our second decade of the 21st century, historic models no longer can stratify or determine how we determine our target markets. So I've got to remember, I've got to try and do the juggling act here because I don't have a podium to work from, so I've got to think about as I'm going. So these historic ideas of fashion elitism, are they still relevant today? And I would say that no, we now have to rethink of where we are. The new luxury is not about class distinction, but about personal meanings, values and integrity. By essence, the parameters of class and status are now blurred in the 21st century. Consider the key historic definers of status. They have always been education and the kind of role that someone's had, their career. Well, now, further education is the norm across industrialised countries and is the exception rather than, it's no longer the exception, it's the norm. And there are now outmoded notions of career determining status. You only need to see the bills from your local plumbers, electricians and builders to know that we've completely shifted the whole kind of profile of what was white-collar workers and blue-collar workers. Luxury has a history built on an outmoded model of status and wealth. It can no longer be predominantly defined by class or be regarded as the domain of the wealthy customer. Luxury has gone through a whirlwind redefinition in the past 20 years, and we've seen a really significant shift in the concept of luxury just being around prestige. And it's now also becoming mainstream. Through massive branding campaigns that have graced the world's glossy magazines, the mega luxury brands have flooded the market with their logos. The UK industry publication, FW, aptly named this a number of years ago, Logo, a go-go. Through fashion communication vehicles such as advertising, marketing and promotion, aspirational fashion then became an everyday reality. We've often heard the term mastige, which is a term that was developed out of the Harvard Business Review, has really been amped up by the guys from Future Laboratory, and it's that obvious fusion of prestige product for the masses. Premium brands started to realise that they could actually really build their profits by actually being accessible to everybody through the whole category area of sunglasses, handbags, shoes, cosmetics. Class lines became blurred and purchasing power premium products was available to a broader base of customer. Those aspiring to into luxury culture had entree to the glamour and the positioning of indulgence. I don't know how many of you may have read Dana Thomas's tome on Luxury Has Lost Its Lustre. Let me just read you a quote from it. The luxury industry has changed the way people dress. It has realigned our economic class system. It has changed the way we interact with others. It has become part of our social fabric. To achieve this, it has sacrificed its integrity, undermined its products, tarnished its history, and hoodwinked its consumers. In order to make luxury accessible, tycoons have stripped away all that has made it special. Luxury has lost its lustre. Luxury's foray into masstige has brought speed, efficiency, cheaper prices, and it's also brought diminished standards. And the strategy of most companies appears intent on chasing the mighty dollar, which actually sacrifices the ability to truly profit. See, luxury in its early formations, in its initial formations, was all about this premium product created with expensive materials, in crafted manner, required depth of expertise and dexterity. But by the 1990s, although these elements were still kind of considered important, what we actually saw was that the brand itself became important rather than the product. The interlocking C's of a Chanel or the LV symbol of Louis Vuitton, the little Prada red stripes, were all signifiers that a purchaser had bought in to a prestige community. Now, we're still living through the fashion fallout of this particular trend that happened over the last 2 decades, where branding reigns supreme. And for 2 decades there, the whole notion of who you bought was far more important than what you bought. And the brand was all about creating a mood rather than the product itself being important. But where does it go next? So luxury's evolved from the unique prestige product for a few, then masstige for all, with logo driving sales. What and where do we want to buy now? In the current social climate, neither the premium product or the brand concept no longer seem to be relevant. As proposed in the David report, yesterday's luxury was for the few. It was quite shallow and was desired because it separated you from the masses. The luxury today is a growing part of society, at least in the developed countries, and more people adapt to it every day. But what happens to the concept of luxury if everyone can take part? Is it a contradiction? It's really interesting. I don't know how many of you might have come to a presentation that was held at the Melbourne Fashion Festival earlier this year, and luxury strategist and academic Mark Ritson was talking there, and he'd been part of a research where he'd got companies all around the world to describe in words, just keywords, what their brand was about. And he asked all these different brands, and then he compiled the 5 most used words, and he said nearly every brand around the world was using these same exactly 5 words. Now, if everyone's using the same 5 words, it loses the meaning. It actually has no integrity. They all have no distinguishing values. Simply, everyone seems to be defining themselves in the same way, and such used and abused terminology has lost its substance. So luxury's future status will be determined by characteristics embedded now within our fashion system, and how the end user, our customer, will signify the value of these. This is actually a new construct. It's a cultural shift where the fashion system itself, all of the elements from conceptualisation through to the communication of it, to the realisation of product and how we disseminate it out there, are all going to actually all together start to determine what luxury might be. The fashion system. It's all about product development, clothing production, garment distribution, and the selling of lifestyles, often in the guise of fashion marketing. But you know what? All of these things embrace processes focused on speed, appropriation, homogeneity. Sorry, it's a bit hard to do the sheet thing here. Now, the fashion system has entrenched processes and mechanisms that created a fast-paced industry built on this notion of overt consumption. Now, most of these you would say, well, that's got nothing to do with luxury. Isn't this the domain of the mass market? But unfortunately, that's exactly where luxury has positioned itself. This cycle of excessive consumption has led to customers feeling frustration, boredom and complacency. The past 10 years has seen this major cultural shift now where customers themselves are becoming aware. And while the fashion industry continues to perpetuate a model of constant supply, the growing trend that we cannot ignore out there is actually towards restraint. This is interesting. Nike have introduced this terminology of considered design. I would actually argue that all design should be considered, but that's how they've actually positioned themselves around this sustainable framework. Outspoken UK-based designer Vivienne Westwood contributed to this whole cultural shift when she made a provocative statement to buy nothing. Now, can you imagine Westwood, in the middle of London Fashion Week, which is there to actually try and sell more product, turned around and said, why can't we for 6 months not buy anything? I'm going to quote Westwood. If you ask me what I think people should be getting next season, I'll tell you what I'd like them to buy. Nothing. I'd like people to stop buying and buying and buying. There's this idea that somehow you've got to keep changing things and as often as possible. Maybe if people just decided not to buy anything for a while, they'd get a chance to think about what they wanted, what they really liked. So luxury now is not about buying more, but about actually halting the cycle of overt consumption and giving customers a refreshing reason to buy. That means products that have purpose, that function for one's lifestyle, that products that offer something special. And this is particularly relevant now, post the global financial crisis, because what we've now seen is a whole new attitude, and that attitude has really influenced our fashion customers, who actually put spending on hold while the economies across the world spiralled out of control. Do you know that the whole GFC actually provided an opportunity for fashion advocates all around the world to step back and reassess the way they spent? People went, I don't know what's going to happen next, so I'm just going to hold off for a little while and see what actually happens. Then all of a sudden they went, God, I survived a whole season without having those new Prada shoes or that new Miu Miu bag or the new Margiela jacket. And actually I rediscovered my wardrobe, and my wardrobe wasn't too bad anyway. And maybe I do want to buy something, but I don't need to buy it all. So what we're seeing is actually a whole cultural shift in the way that people are saying, do I need so much stuff? Consumers at all levels are now determined to live more within their means, and though they still desire luxury goods, the products they now seek need to have a discernible and lasting value. In the current climate, we've seen a major shift with now the trend for excess and blatant showing off of wealth as seen as actually irresponsible and inappropriate. When a customer parts with what I call their image dollars, the funds that they invest in fashion, rather than being a victim of the fast-paced system that requires constant replenishing, the global shift is for merchandise that is unique, embraces quality and has true value. Ben Klein from the Leo Burnett agency in the USA, to quote him, says, "We are seeing a shift from a trade-up culture to a trade-off culture." So this is a really good time for businesses that focus on beautifully crafted artisan designs and products that will last. So where next for luxury? Does the heritage of premium product or the value of the brand still have resonance in the wake of the GFC? Society's evolved. Getting too close to it. Society's evolved rapidly in the past 2 years, and although the signifiers have been there for a while, the jolt of a global slap in the face has made consumers sit up and assess the world we live in. So now consumers are determined to live within their means, but they are about luxury goods that will last. things that you will actually have in your wardrobe and hand down to your children. Or you might look at something like Hackett. Hackett is a bespoke tailor, Savile Row tailor in the UK, who do work within this framework of long-lasting garments with their exquisite suits. And they said, well, if a suit can last forever, why can't a pair of jeans last forever? I'm sure John will agree with me, John from Nobody. So, you know, we use the same kind of thinking around the way that we might make a beautiful bespoke piece, we can make with our everyday clothes as well. David Wolf, who's the co-author of Ageless Marking and Firms of Endearment, a book, says the zeitgeist reflects a shift away from narcissistic and materialistic values. This is the future of luxury brands, not just value, but core values. Not just low prices, but high product longevity. And not just superficial bling, but deep customer connection. And this whole trend sees a reassessment of fashion into areas that have meaning to the wearer. So we're hearing terms like sustainability, investment dressing, longevity, heirlooms, words we haven't heard for many years. And customers really are reassessing the way that they buy something. We don't want to be seen as a victim of fashion anymore, a victim of consumption. The problem is that we're seeing a shift in the customer, but we're not seeing it in the industry. And, you know, we're seeing that the problem with our industry is that speed and price have dominated this industry for far too long. Now, I don't know how many of you might have read this 1970 book called Future Shock. Has anyone here read it? It's like 1970, so it's a long way. It was written by Alvin Toffler, and he coined this phrase future shock, which was the analogy of culture around a new and profoundly upsetting psychological disease caused in Western post-industrial society by the rising rate of change that makes reality seem sometimes like a kaleidoscope run wild. Change is avalanching upon our heads, and most people are grotesquely unprepared to cope with it. Now, Toffler wrote that in 1970. Fast track, excuse the pun, 40 years later, and in fact our world has quickened to a speed that Toffler could not have even imagined. The fashion industry now works at an incredible pace. The proliferation of new product occurs at a speed that rivals absolutely every other product industry. The food industry produces food more than we do, but they don't have to make a new collection that goes into store on a weekly basis, do they? They actually are still making that same one can of tomatoes. They're not making a new can of tomatoes every 2 weeks. And we don't just make one, we make a whole collection. So when you've got your chain stores putting new product into store on a weekly basis and 19 days from concept to retail, you're actually living in a world that no one else can actually comprehend within product-focused industries. Designers have found themselves a victim of consumption, ruled by this idea of having to constantly feed this process. It really puts on, words like quick response, supply chain acceleration are now just normal words within our industry. We don't even question them anymore. But do we need to be so fast? This puts such pressure on a designer. Imagine, wouldn't it be beautiful as a designer? I don't know, we've got a lot of designers amongst our audience, to have time to research, time to develop, time to reflect, time to perfect, time to improve and reassess. Time is the new luxury. When designers create something that is carefully considered, refined and handcrafted with potentially bespoke techniques, its value is enhanced because that most value of concepts, time, has enabled it. Time is a negotiable currency. In today's society, we know it's become the quick or the dead. But as a consequence, products that take time to create have a special value, which goes well beyond money. Time-rich processes are now precious and highly treasured. Time has turned into luxury, true luxury. Time is more or less one of the only things you can't buy with money. Time allows for place for dreams, and time allows you to find harmony. Now, so a strategy that I talked about earlier today that I think is definitely worth considering is this whole idea of slow close, a potential movement that responds to the notions of speed, appropriation and homogeneity within our industry. So many labels have considered this idea of slow, but until there's a total shift in our system, it'll really be difficult to halt the constant flow of product that is being produced under superficial conditions. The mass chains and department stores have set the pace on ridiculous delivery cycles, so the proliferation of new product within our industry works at a speed that no one else would actually ever consider. And luxury organisations have become entrenched in a system that now also skips processes so to get as much product into the market, utilising minimal time and resources. It's the sausage factory mentality towards garment production. According to Dana Thomas, who I quoted earlier, to meet profit forecasts, the luxury companies have cut corners. Some use inferior materials and many have quietly outsourced to developing nations. Most have replaced individual handcraftsmanship with assembly line production. So there are alternatives though. Martin Raymond, who's the editor of Viewpoint magazine and heads up Future Laboratory, to quote him, he says, Many are now asking if the future is really about making our world a faster, slicker, more transient place. Or should we be revisiting ideals of slowness, artisanship, integrity of products, aspects of our lives relegated to the past, a place where quality was as much a matter of time as it was of talent, patience and slow, but consistent and humane productivity levels. This whole trend for slow design quality and the advocating of buy-nothing days, weeks and months has created a new thinking at the luxury end of the scale. One of the issues that I have around our industry is this notion of homogenised product. Imitable product appears in diverse cities across the globe. I don't know how many of you might have travelled recently. When I was in Europe earlier in the year and you go from here and you stop off maybe in Singapore or Hong Kong, I went by the UK, went on to Paris. If you ever spend time in the airports all around the world, have you noticed that they all look the same? Every airport has got Prada, Gucci, you name them, they're all there. Everything looks the same. It used to be that you couldn't wait to get to Paris to see the fabulous Parisian labels, but now you can see them in every high street around the world. Where's the point of difference? The new luxury will mean that brands with retail stores in major cities across the globe dispensing the same product in synergistic modes may need to reassess the model they are working within. An interesting concept that if you do Marketing 101, and just as important within our design world, is you're meant to know who your customer is. But it's actually a virtually impossible thing to do, is actually know who your customer is when you're just selling all across the world. This is the massification of retail. It's based on the assumptions about consumer types that span the world, generic customers with similar tastes, common desire. Have we dispensed the world's fashion consumers into one big melting pot? If it is yes, this creates a really bland and depressing image in a world of fashion that is meant to be all about innovation, creativity and focused on diversity. I think it's the same old sheet. So by contrast, the world keeps doing this, but I think that our customers out there are aspiring to personal goods and services. We just saw the work of Glenn Rollison, where every single piece is individual, is different. And I think this is where there are real opportunities into the future. The customers out there are looking for product that is unique, items that are special, individual pieces not readily available. Maybe they're created by using specialist methods. We are seeing a newfound appreciation for the handcrafted, often with technology-enhanced treatments that make them new. Luxury within a contemporary environment is not about excess, but now about meaning. It's all about the new experience. There's been a real resurgence in the appreciation of locally produced merchandise that reflects the peculiarities of its inherent culture. It's not a new concept. It's actually something that Faith Popcorn years ago termed loco couture. According to WGSN, many brands are shifting their offer to suit local markets, and they've titled this super local. And that's where you go in and you work with creators and artisans within a local market using their specific techniques that are peculiar to their area and making product unique for different areas around the world. The future of creative product industries will be enhanced by the opportunities of merging the benefits of both a global environment and the local identity. And hopefully it will result in products that offer real value and regional uniqueness. The other thing I think that's happening with our industry at the moment is this whole notion of overconsumption and actually just churning out this product has unfortunately become a defining paradigm of fashion, which also doesn't help because it keeps on being considered as being a world of frivolity and superficiality because we keep just flooding the market with more and more stuff. I think luxury needs to be redefined. Luxury is not about price positioning and logos. It does, however, need to revisit the characteristics of value, true value. And that's not just about putting something at the higher echelons of the monetary scale, but starting to reassess things for their social, community and environmental consequences. The economic foundations of value have become secondary, as luxury now has to have new meaning to its user. Luxury will also be different for every customer. What's important for one may vary significantly for another. Customers will align with brands whose values they respect. This is where the overwhelming of criteria for the new luxury is based on integrity. According to the David Report, we see a new kind of responsible luxury that's evolving from the inside. It looks quite different from luxury as we know it today. It will probably be more about cultural experiences than material possessions, more about sharing than keeping. So I ask the question, today a new era has evolved, rising from the quagmire of fast fashion, quick response and homogenised styling. The fashion with integrity is reclaiming its position as the soulful leader and will pay tribute to the artisan and the personal. After many years of product focused on financial rationalisation, there are now emerging opportunities for a system which respects the intrinsic value of technique and interpreted it into a modern context. Luxury might be those products that are crafted with care, often handmade, to provide a sense of the unique, utilising quality processes. It may include heritage techniques, embracing bespoke and couture, or it might be that we actually want to preserve some of the traditions that we've had in the local traditions from our past. It's not, however, luxury is not just about the price you pay. But the world where the more expensive or the most prestigious product is not pertinent if the product has no value. An inexpensive product that provides meaning to the end user may for that individual be a valued item and for them will be luxury. Unique, custom-made, bespoke are embedded terms within luxury's fashion narrative. But in its contemporary context, this will extend where the personal and customised are sought after. And when we make choices about how we enhance our lives, what we wear, how we decorate our homes, we'll search out products that provide a dimension of soul and offer something fulfilling. Luxury is no longer defined by the accumulation of cultured aesthetics or the price you pay. Luxury today is determined by integrity. Thank you very much. Sorry, that was a little bit awkward. So now we're going to call on to our panel, and we'll get the panellists up here. We've got Sarah, Eunika and Joe.
I'm Eunika Janus. You heard me this morning. I'm from IP Australia, which is a federal government agency that protects intellectual property rights, including fashion.
Hi. Ooh, very loud microphone. I'm Gale on a very swiftly chair. I consult to the fashion industry. I've been a buyer over the last 3 decades for lots of the high street brands who really do mass market. And yeah, really happy to be part of the panel this afternoon.
Talking just how you think the shifts that we're seeing might actually affect especially the mass market.
Sure. Look, I love Karen's paper. I read it this morning in depth, and I think it's spot on. We're seeing a real change in the retail landscape in Australia and across the world as well. I think we've seen so many of the prestigious labels do diffusion labels that hit mass market, and I think that's been one of the things that has really, again, pulled that luxury market into mass and made it so accessible that people are saying, well, where is that new luxury? And I think that people are becoming a lot more social conscious, and the way that we view fashion and the fashion trends is really just a true reflection of our social consciousness and how that's changing. And we're all looking for a sense of belonging and a sense of connectedness. And I think, Karen, that's what your paper said to me. It's about that artisan, it's about that personal experience. And when you look at the fashion trends, even on the high street market, no longer can you go just cookie cutter. Why do you think we have so many markdowns out there? Because it's too cookie cutter. We need to make sure that the customer these days want to style themselves as themselves. And I understand this hasn't gone completely broad reach yet, but they do want to have a sense of themselves. So I think that where the retailers need to look at is, if they're going to interpret trends, how do they do that differently, and how do they allow that consumer to be able to buy special pieces and not just loads of... They can't do volume like they used to. Back in the 80s, you used to have the tables. Remember the tables out the front of the stores? All their key items. The key items are gone. They don't work like that anymore. A basic... we see a lot of high-low shopping as well, a lot of designer, and then a lot of basics from Kmart, from Target. People go for those very, very basics. They're looking to plug their wardrobes with price-driven things, but no longer can the retailers actually make a load of money out of just basics. You don't see the tables anymore, and I think that's reflective of where we're seeing this shift. A basic now has to be a fashion basic, even in the high street market. I'll hand over to you, Joe, for a...
No. Look, I think that's fantastic, and I agree, and I especially picked up on what Karen was saying about beauty, because I'll shift the game a little bit, because I think there's an opportunity to do something which we've got away from. And you talk about the consumer, but I'm interested in that word flattering garments. And I think, we put it... I used to retail once upon a time, and there was a thing where we always, as soon as we saw the customer's hand go out onto the garment or the fabric or the materials, they equated the price with the handle of the fabric or whatever it was. And I think we've moved away from designing for the body, for how flattering that is when we look at our ranges. And I think there's an aspect in luxury, in beauty, that we need to re-engage in designing product that actually looks beautiful. And as pattern makers and technicians, we all know there are certain things that you can do in drafting that will create a much more flattering garment on a particular body. But there's also issues around colour. There's about 12 colours that we know that are very complementary on nearly everybody. And are you including some of those pieces in your ranges to make them flattering? And I'll just bring a little analogy. My son said to me about a week and a half ago, he goes, "Mum, there's this brand that's making leather products, and I reckon they're going to be really big, and they're up in Kellock, and it's called Tail Feather." And I was just over in the premiere show in the exhibition buildings, and there, sure enough, I'm walking down the aisle, and there's this brand, Tail Feather, and they're the leather products, and the tools and everything are there. But it reminded me, Karen, when I was talking about the luxury products, when leather was around all those years ago, that started this whole notion of luxury. And I think and then I walked over and I saw 3 fish, and they were members of ours doing the organics. And then I went along to the next rack and I saw silk, and I saw the colours that were there, and I thought, oh, they're those beautiful colours, the sage, the bones that are more flattering to everybody. And so I think there's an opportunity there for when we're designing and in that luxury space to really engage and look at the customer that you're designing for. And I think that will be, women especially, and men will appreciate that. So,
and one thing that I find baffling is why designers today seem to all want to be similar to the one next to them. And from particularly a legal perspective, but also just as a fashion consumer myself, I just find it entirely baffling why so many labels, when you look at students, particularly I'm sure at RMIT, the best fashion schools in the country, they all are creative, they all really want to do something different, and then they get out in the industry and they end up somehow becoming this kind of homogenous mass, which I find interesting. Why does one high street store pretty much look exactly the same as another high street store? We've lost that ability to be able to tell where a particular product comes from just by looking at little details like buttons or something, which in the past is great. Differentiating factors not only make you as a consumer feel different and interesting and unique and different from the person next to you on the tram or the train, but it also is easier for that design house, that store, to actually be able to protect that creativity, because it's easier to actually register a design, for example, in a legal sense, to register a trademark that is distinctive, that's different from everything else around. So I would say, don't be afraid to be different to the person next door. Create a point of difference, which I think fits really, really well with that idea of the new luxury. Why do we need 100,000 stores around the world, that are really, really similar? Why not tailor them to particular markets, to particular preferences, and to your own? I think listen to your own design aesthetic as well. If you love something, other people might as well. So it's really, it sort of ties in with everything. You'll get a customer following which is loyal, but at the same time it'll be easier to grow your business because you'll tap into a niche and you'll do something different from everybody else, which then means your business might actually be much more sustainable and last the distance, rather than just trying to blindly copy somebody else who may not be that original in the first place. And secondly, you may actually end up having a legal case against you for copying somebody, which you certainly don't want if you're starting out in business. I think on the brand issue, if I can just make one other point, I think it's a very interesting anecdote. I'm sure many of you have heard this, but after Hurricane Katrina a couple of years ago in the US, there was a lot of people obviously lost their homes, their entire livelihoods, everything that they'd worked for, and there was this one anecdote of people were getting $1,000 grants from the government just to sort of survive for the couple of weeks before they knew what to do with them, the people who'd lost so much of their livelihood. And so there was this story that was really widely reported of 2 women travelling into the nearest big city and going into a very high luxury label and each buying a handbag for their $1,000. Now, if that is not an indication of something really going wrong, what else is? So they were willing to forego the food. They just wanted that moment of their luxury of clutching that bag and thinking, okay, I may have lost my house, but at least I've got this bag. I mean, it's almost funny, but it's tragic as well, because it's true. So there is certainly something wrong, and I think it's up to all of us to slowly really be pushing for change.
We've created such a culture, and I say we because I think we all have to take responsibility for it, a culture within our industry around plagiarism, where we actually see it as the norm that people who call themselves designers, who are essentially really product developers, travel the world on what we call buying trips or sampling trips or research trips, and what they do is they buy up a whole lot of the overseas samples, because we've also built up a culture of no risk. We think if it's being tested in an international environment, that it's all okay. But it doesn't mean that everything does look the same. And I really like this idea of having techniques that are embedded into your designs that are unique. So you actually register your technique, not necessarily your overall design. Because of the speed we're working, it's hard to register a design. If you look at designers around the world like Margiela or Jean-Paul Gaultier, who actually have techniques embedded in every one of their designs, you could actually have that kind of thing.
That's right, and that can actually function, so that technique can function as a brand, as a trademark for your item. So a customer from a distance can see a particular pair of shoes, a particular jacket, and know where that comes from, and that is essentially what a trademark is. And so if you educate the consumers that a particular panel on your jacket, that a particular swing tag, a particular type of button is yours over time, basically you could register that as a trademark. A trademark is a business asset that you can basically have forever. You have to register it and you keep renewing it. And that is actually, it's a tangible business asset that you can then sell, you can license. So you're not only doing something creative, but you're also doing a good thing, I suppose, for your business, because your business will become distinctive and your business will actually prosper because of that point of difference. And people say, I love those buttons, that's a XYZ jacket, I want to wear that. So it all really ties beautifully in together.
I think it does, and I think one point that Karen made within her paper, though, is that in the industry we've shifted, but I don't think we've seen enough of a consumer shift yet. So what you were talking about before in why do the designers all look the same and why aren't they doing, if they love something, go with that. It actually doesn't work on a commercial level at this point in time. For them, I always say to designers, you must have your signature and really pull it in, so things like that. But then you also have to think of your end user. So you've got to think of your consumer. But I'm as part of a program with the New South Wales government, I've been mentoring 5 Aboriginal designers, and 3 of them are here at the trade show for this weekend showing, for their very first showing, which is very exciting. So what we've done with them is we've looked at their ancestry, and they want to tell the stories of, we had another one at Design Made Trade and Homewares, and we look at their creation stories, we look at their stories of their ancestry and where they've come from, and they've incorporated that into their ranges. So one of them is called Mimi Designs over there, and her totem is the emu, and so she's used a beautiful feather print in there, and everything has pulled in. But when I first started working with her, like most designers, she was scattered and all over the place. So where she was targeting was very eclectic, and it wasn't really pulling together as a collection. And I think if you head over to her stand, you will get where she's been able to go, this is my signature, this is the area that I want to reach. How do I pull it into a cohesive range? Because my greatest thing is I want designers to be able to hold their signature. I want that point of difference. But I want them to be able to reach the consumer, because I want the consumer to be able to understand what it is, to be able to pick a piece and treasure it. Really treasure it, so that it stays within your wardrobe for a decade, and you keep pulling it out, being able to put it in with all sorts of different pieces that you've bought. I always say because I help style people as well, whatever you buy, whether you're a buyer or whether you're a shopper, so let's make the distinctions, whether you're going into retail or whether it's for your own wardrobe, every piece should really earn its place. So I often talk to people about shopping in the sales. My God, don't go to the sales unless you really, really desire something. And don't buy it because it's cheap. Because the thing you'll remember when it's in your wardrobe is, yeah, it was cheap, but you won't value it. These days, we need to have connection and belonging, and we need to value ourselves and therefore value anything we bring into our own field. So I think it's really important, and that's one of the things the high street stores, I think, are just starting to cotton on to. Cotton on, that was a strange one, them too. Is that volume sales have gone down. And we're not seeing, that's why we're seeing so many markdowns. And yes, the GFC and blah, blah, blah. The reason we're having the GFC, though, apart from all the financial areas. Energetically, we are shifting, and the businesses are not keeping up, and it's time we needed to really keep up with it. And I love the fact that we've got some really independent designers here and over at Premier this weekend as well. And I think they're the ones we really need to foster and really go and support. And the Australian made, because we've lost a lot of skill base here. Manufacturing, we've lost skill base, and we really need to back those manufacturers who do work here. So if we can back an Australian-made product, we're just going to increase our industry here and really allow for avenues for Australian designers and for designers who are going to come up with their own things. Who would like?
I was actually going to ask you a question because I get a lot of reports in my position come across my desk, and one of the ones at the moment that I was startled at was that the role of buyer, with a HR report, earns about 20% more than the role of designer. And I thought, how did we get to that position in our...
It's interesting because the sale, I probably read the same HR reports, that anyone involved with sales earns more in a company than, say, someone also in production. And this is where I was talking earlier about the value of brand is more important than the actual product. But I actually think we're seeing a shift. And maybe it's just the optimist in me that people will start to appreciate product. But we have come out of an era where we're still in many areas entrenched in an era where the product is churned out. Like I was talking to a friend of mine who's been in the industry almost as long as I have, and he was saying he's worked for all the top chains and stuff, and he said that his team, these younger team, are all sitting on computers and designing flat and don't actually even get to feel a piece of fabric. And he said they're just churning through these designs and they're not even thinking about something that's three-dimensional. Have we forgotten that a body is a sculptural thing and we're meant to be in the round? So all these designs you see that have only got a detail on the front but don't follow through to the back, or where the fabric, like you were saying before about this handle, the tactility, where you used to touch something and that's when you fell in love with it. Now the younger consumers don't even know what the difference between wool and acrylic is half the time. And because we've got to go back to re-educate around these qualities and the longevity of different fibres, materials, the impact on our environment, and all of those things. So I think that anything that's equating with sales earns more because it's got a measurable result. I think that the belief that a designer is almost a replaceable position because it's about churning through ideas that we're taking off WGSN or out of an international market. When we employ designers that actually do provide that level of unique, give a brand a point of difference, that's when they're going to be valued, when we actually see a shift in the bottom line within a company. But it's a subjective concept, so subjective areas are always hard to fund.
I think that whole point of time that you made in your presentation is incredibly important, given time, and I think it almost applies to any profession, doesn't it? If we actually sit down and have time to reflect and critique and build something, then we can really, our brain becomes freer to create something completely new. And that is this frightening thing, as we're talking about with the notion of a fashion designer today who works for one of these big labels. How can they possibly even physically come up with tens of designs a day, hundreds a year? How is that even possible? So that also affects the prevalence of copying that happens, because it's impossible for someone to have so many creative flashes in a particular day. But give them a week, give them time to ponder, to think, you'll actually find that they come up with something beautiful, and then again it's easier to protect, it might be more desirable, it's a point of difference. So that issue of time, I think, is really crucial.
It becomes so number driven and it becomes very there's no entrepreneurial spirit, which you have to have as a designer as well. And look, I totally agree with Karen. The designers also, I think, I'd have to put designers in an inverted commas when it comes to those larger companies, because it is about pulling off WGSN. It is about research trips. It is about, it's not about starting from scratch and thinking about that whole body. So it is, and the buyer has the checkbook. So yes, very measurable and a lot of responsibility, and a lot of the time, the designers actually don't have the accountability. So the designer designs, and then the buyer chooses what they want, and then they go to it. Yeah.
Just on a couple of levels there, from that creative perspective, even where you've got really creative designers, being in the environment they are, where they've got to churn through ideas, I believe if we didn't have that environment, and I'm going to put it out there, we would still have Alexander McQueen with us today. He was so under pressure to constantly come up with these ideas that he just couldn't do it anymore. Equally, I think people like John Galliano wouldn't have tipped over the edge like he did, because he actually was under so much pressure. The substance abuse at that level with designers because of the pressure they're put onto. Because you could look at a lot of those designers are not only just designing for the big house, but their own labels and the handbags and the sunglasses and everything else. So you've got that at one level, which is not very appealing, is it really, if you want to go into that level of the industry? And then equally at the other end, you've got people who may have trained in places like RMIT and find they're actually out in an environment where they're just being asked to rip off. So what we've got to do is find the middle ground. And I actually think we all have a responsibility around that, of actually having an awareness. We don't want to be alarmist, we don't want to be depressing in our last session of the day. What we want to say is we've actually got to shift.